Well, you can do that when you start again.
Good evening, and happy to be back here in London. Really happy. I've been looking forward to this visit for a long, long time. That's why I planned actually to spend about 3.5. Well, that's what I hoped. And I hoped that this trip, something of a very momentous nature, would take place in our work. Whether or not it does is really up to you. I've done as much as I can in preliminary work. I had in mind a great many more things for this trip, because I thought probably we were going to have a meeting almost every week for 3 months to get something started in the right direction. And if anything comes of it at all, it will have to come through you. I must tell you first of all about different phases of our work, because when our work started here in England, I realized how strange it must sound to you. I was trying to say something that was perhaps the reverse of most of the things that you'd been studying. I don't know whether you understood it that way, or whether you were trying to make it fit into what you already knew, because I've watched that, and I know the sad result of it. But you fulfilled one of the most important parts of a spiritual work. You were attracted to it. Now that's the first and most important part, because without that nothing else can happen. In other words, when our work is first presented, there are mixed audiences. That is, mostly those of either Christian Science, Unity, or some other form of New Thought background. And very quickly, these audiences dwindle. As a rule, they will dwindle from, let's say, 400 or 500 people who will attend lectures to 60 or 70 who will end up taking a class. Now, why the difference, the wide difference between the lecture audiences and the class audiences, since the amount of money involved can't be enough to impoverish anyone, even if one could be impoverished studying a spiritual teaching? There must be some other reason then. And the reason is that, as the Master indicated, many are called, few are chosen, or the way is straight and narrow, and few there be that enter. Why few? Well, you are called upon in a spiritual teaching to leave all for Christ. Give up mother, brother, father, sister if necessary. Sell all that you have in order to buy this pearl. In other words, it's a way of sacrifice. It's a way of giving up. It's a way of surrender. Now, of course, the average metaphysical student doesn't come to a truth to surrender or to give up. The main thought is on what will I get out of this? And that's part of the teaching, demonstrating things, getting things. And it's all right on that level. No criticism of it, no condemnation of it for those that are on that level. But it has nothing to do with a spiritual teaching. A spiritual teaching has nothing to do with getting. If you can imagine the Master saying to the disciples, leave your nets, then you get some idea of what it means to not get, but surrender. Or if you can imagine the disciples, the apostles, the 200, going about, taking no thought for their life, taking neither purse nor scrip, suffering persecution, later on death itself, you will certainly realize then that the way of the Christ is not a way of getting, it's a way of surrendering, giving. Now, I realize that when students hear me at first, they do not gather that. They gather that we're quickly going to mount onto cloud 9, 10, or 11. And we're not going to come down to earth at all, except to be perhaps to heal a few of our neighbors. But it doesn't work out that way. And so it is that only a few out of the hundreds come to the classwork. And then out of those who come to the first classwork, it isn't unusual for 25, 30%, 33 and a third percent of them to drop away and never come back to the work anymore, because by that time they have caught a little of this vision. But the rest, they become the nucleus of the work that follows, and as a rule you will find those who survive the first class, you'll find those as a rule in the 8th and 9th and 10th classes. As a matter of fact, some of you here already know now that there have been students in our classwork from the very first class 12 years ago, and there are some in my classwork who were patients long before I ever taught and have been with me now 25 years. So that out of these who comprise the nucleus, a very strong activity follows. After the first year or two, or let me put it this way, during the first year or two that students are with the Infinite Way work, they do not come in contact with any of this surrendering or giving. It is all primarily a getting. In other words, they begin to get healings. Their personal lives begin to be adjusted. Harmonies come into their experience. Greater health, sometimes a greater supply, greater sense of peace, and no demands are made upon them, since the Infinite Way has no memberships, has no dues, never asks anyone to support it, and outside of the very little that is contributed toward classwork, nobody is under any obligation at any time to do anything more than that. And so it's really, the students are all on the receiving end and not on the giving. But somewhere in that second year, that's where we begin to run into a little trouble. We begin to, if it isn't the second, it's the third, and in some cases it isn't until the fourth. And then the trouble begins. And it always happens in the self-same way. The ego gets into the picture, and students begin to realize that if they are really to attain spiritual grace, that they are called upon to surrender human traits. Not only their evil ones, oh no, that they would love to do, but here's where the trouble comes in, some of their nice ones, their good ones. Many good traits have to go out the window when the Spirit comes in. Many wonderful things have to go out the window. Many comforts have to go out the window. And that is when the student begins to rebel. That is when the student begins to flare up. What is this? I thought that I was adding comfort and peace and health and supply to myself, but all of a sudden I don't feel right. The chances are even that there are physical discords beginning to rise. Very few people realize that all human beings start to die as soon as they're born. It just takes them sometimes 60 or 70 years to get there. Very few people stop to realize that no matter how healthy they may be outwardly, regardless of how painless their bodies may be, that there are very often diseases taking root, taking effect within them that are only going to come to light many years later. And then sometimes the doctor says, oh, if you had only told me a few years ago, we could have saved you, but now it's too late. And you say, well, I didn't know it a few years ago. I didn't have any pains or discords. So it is that the human body has within itself many, many potentialities of discord, of error, and left to themselves, they would just keep on multiplying until they got bad enough to be painful. But under a program of 2 or 3 years of very serious spiritual work, these errors are not permitted to lie dormant. They are roused up. Now the minor ones have all sloughed off. The minor ones have been healed. The minor headaches or indigestion or bowel disorders or corns or bunions or calluses, the little trivialities that disturb the ordinary human body disappear of their own nothingness. But the more serious ones now are rooted out, and they become troublesome, because now is the time when they must be made to disappear. They cannot be allowed to remain there dormant to spring up 5 or 10 years from now. Now is the time when they must be met, and they usually wait until you've really got enough understanding with which to meet it. Now it isn't only physical discords, but the ego itself is very dormant in most people because it has no opportunity, or very little opportunity, to be catered to. You have perhaps heard some people give testimonies in a church and find that when they got to their feet to speak that they couldn't sit down. Well, you usually find they didn't have much opportunity at home to do any talking, and now the ego is given free rein, and it doesn't know how to control itself. So it is that people who ordinarily receive no honors, no glories, are apt to be just little nobodies, like really all of us are in our true identity as humans. All of a sudden we begin to blossom out And we either get to be the head of a committee, or we get to be a teacher or a practitioner or something or other, and then the dear little ego starts to be fanned, and all of a sudden it begins to find itself with great dignities and titles and whatnots, and then comes the period of rebellion that I spoke about before, the inability to quiet itself, and a period of struggle ensues. In other words, during this second, third, or fourth year of a very serious spiritual study, you can really expect the worst of us to come to the surface. Whether it's a physical worst, a moral worst, a mental worst, yes, even a moral worst, because it is a very strange thing that a spiritual teaching engenders great love. It is a very great warmth, a very great relationship that takes place between students who are very seriously on the spiritual path, among practitioners and patients, teachers and students, and even among students themselves. And if this is not rightly interpreted, it can fool the very elect into believing that it's really human love, and then follow many disastrous experiences on this metaphysical and spiritual path. It is only if wisdom comes along and shows to the individual, yes, there is this great love, there is this great bond, but it's of a spiritual nature, and it has to be kept channeled in spiritual lines so that the human element does not rise to the surface, but eventually becomes refined and spiritualized. Then come the most wonderful relationships the world has ever known. So it is that in many different ways, this second, third, fourth year is a troublesome one, troublesome 2, a troublesome 3. And in many ways, our worst side of ourselves comes to the surface, and if it's not wisely handled, we can find ourselves not only like Lot's wife looking back at the city, the state of consciousness she'd left, but we can also find ourselves walking back to those cities, walking back to those places of outgrown consciousness, places we've long since outgrown, but now all of a sudden the goal looks so far away from us that we decide to turn back. And it is in these years that we need to watch ourselves most closely to be sure that we aren't getting discouraged, that we aren't discouraged with our problems, that we aren't discouraged with the situations that face us, but that we continue forward. Now it is at this period of unrest that doubts and questions come to our thought. Am I on the right path? Is this my way? You would imagine that can't happen, because you would say, no, if I look back at this healing that I witnessed, I know that this is the Christ itself. Or if I see the change that's taken place in my life, I know that this is the way. Or if I just remember some of the healings I've witnessed of other students, I know that regardless of what may or may not have happened to me, I know that this is still the way, whether or not I have found it. But unfortunately, that is not true. It is rather true that even if you raise them from the dead, they will not believe. When this period of doubt comes, people forget all about the wonderful healings they had or witnessed. They forget about all the evidences of the fact that this is the path. All of that is forgotten, because the things of God are foolishness with man, and man in his man estate cannot grasp the things of God. And so it is that we find so many students in those years turn away. Now, there's no harm in it if they have merely found that the particular way they are following is not for them. I mean, there would be no particular harm if an Infinite Way student at that time found that the Infinite Way is not his way, but either was convinced of some other way or was willing to make the continued search for his path. But usually discouragement is too great and they lose the benefit of the years that they have built up. And so it is that we come to this particular period of unrest. Now, it is at this point that I am led to say to you that those who are on the path of the infinite way must remember that its goal is not more or better matter. Its goal is not merely adding more material good to you. Its goal is not merely doubling your income or quadrupling it. Its goal is not merely turning a sick body into a well body, because it is at this point that you're apt to believe that that's the goal and that you have failed. And if you judge by appearances, that is one of the things that can take you away from your studies. The goal of the infinite way is God realization. Now, I will illustrate that for you. As human beings, we are entirely cut off from our source, which is God. A human being is something entirely separate and apart from God. As a matter of fact, a human being is not under the law of God. A human being cannot please God. A human being is not under the grace of God and does not benefit by God. And that is the reason that a human being can be sinful, can be sick, can be poor, can have accidents. Why? Because there is no God government. Their lives are, as the insurance companies call them, statistics. An insurance company can always tell you where you are. Just tell them your age, your birth date, and they'll tell you how close you are to the grave, what chance you have this year for an accident, what percentage point there is of your having surgery. Why? Because you're living the life of a statistic. Just a mathematical average. And out of a room full of 50 people, so many will be dead in 12 months, and so many will be in a hospital, and so many will have surgery, so many will have accidents, and so forth and so on. And all of this because there is no spiritual law governing them, guiding them, directing them, protecting them, sustaining them. In any given year, some people will be twice as well off financially at the end of the year as they were at the beginning, and some will be half as well off, and some will be completely broke, and some will be millionaires. The same reason. There's no law of God operating. It is a matter of economics or chance or luck or fate or what have you. Now, an individual, by some grace of God, and the reason for it no one knows. There are those like myself who have convictions, and that is that it is by grace of our former lives that at any given point we are ready for the spiritual experience. We have evolved to a point of readiness, and then we are directed to a spiritual path. It makes no difference which one it is, because God is no respecter of persons, and once we are on the spiritual path, it would make no difference if we took a wrong one. We still would eventually evolve and arrive at the right one, because once we're on the path, we are destined to unfold to our complete spiritual reality. Now, we touch this spiritual path in one direction or another, We take one path or another, we evolve along that path as far as we can go, and then we find something that to us is higher, and we evolve then along a higher path. Some people may go 2, 3, 4, 5 different paths before they ultimately find that one which is their life path. Some find it right with their first entrance into the spiritual life. It is relatively unimportant whether we find it with our first contact or with our 21st contact. It is only important that in one way or another that we remain on the spiritual path until we arrive. Now, when we come to a spiritual path, never believe for a moment that we are anywhere near the point of arriving. In our spiritual identity, it is true that we are already there. I and my Father are one. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. All that God is, I am. That is true of my spiritual identity. That is not true of Joel the businessman walking up and down this earth as a human. It is not true of you as a businessman or a housewife or a businesswoman. It is only true of your spiritual identity, the reality of you, which remains as a potentiality until the day comes when, as Paul tells us, the Spirit of God dwells in you, and then you become the children of God. When you have learned to pray for your enemies, when you have learned to pray for those who despitefully use you, to forgive 70 times 7, in other words, when you have lost your ego, that is when you become children of God. Children of God, heirs, joint heirs to all the heavenly riches. Then you are God-governed, God-maintained, God-sustained. Then you can travel up and down this world without purse or scrip. Then you can travel up and down this world without taking thought what you shall eat, what you shall drink, wherewithal ye shall be clothed. You can travel up and down this world now because the grace of God is your currency, and the grace of God is your activity, your business, your everything. The message of the infinite way primarily is a path leading to God realization, leading to that moment of God government, God control. The moment, I've given you this so often, I live yet not I, Christ liveth my life. That's the goal of the infinite way. That is its object. Along that way, and as a result of our progress on that way, we have healings, physical, mental, moral, and financial. We have healings of human relationships. We have all manner of healings on this path, but they are not the goal, they are the added things. At some points they are merely proof. In the final analysis they never are, because as I said before, if you raise them from the dead they will not believe. But they do serve a purpose, and a good one. As a matter of fact, they're necessary in the fulfillment of the teaching of Jesus Christ, which is the foundation of our work. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly. Now that's the goal, that's the promise. But then there are those footsteps leading up to the demonstration of that goal. And those are the points that for us become difficult. Firstly, as I say, because of the surrender that is necessary. Now, for the average person in metaphysics, the surrender is not necessary. If what they're seeking is just some harmony in their human lives, and they want to do a little reading and call on a practitioner or a teacher for help here and there, they will get enough out of it to make themselves comfortable and to go along and leave the working out of their ultimate salvation to some future time, some future birth, some future generation. But for those who cannot rest in that, for those who have felt the ego in the breast, for those who have had their footsteps turned onto a spiritual path, there is no such thing as being satisfied with a little physical, mental, moral, or financial relief. There has to be the pressing onward to that ultimate goal, and that is where this surrender comes in. Now, in the wisdoms in the infinite way, you will find a statement that has shocked some of our students all around the globe. And while I try to keep my letter writing very brief as possible, I've had to write some very long ones on this particular question, because many students do not like the statement that we must surrender all our desires, even our good ones. And I've had letters asking me, do I mean that it's wrong to desire the health of their children? Is it wrong to desire supply and comfort? Doesn't the Christ want us to have an abundance of good things, and so forth and so on? And then I have to explain that those are all very wonderful things to have if we attain them through the realization of the Christ and not as a goal in and of itself. Therefore, we must surrender all desire to the one desire, that I might know thee aright, whom to know aright is life eternal, that I might see thee face to face. Oh, that I might know God. Oh, that I might please God. Oh, that the will of God might be made manifest in me. The ability to surrender our complete selfhood so that the Spirit of God can fulfill itself in us in accordance with its will and not with ours. Yes, it is the will of God that we have life eternal. It is the will of God that we bear fruit richly. As a matter of fact, the Christ is planted in our consciousness for one reason and one only: that you might be healed, that you might be enriched, that you might be made at peace, that you might have life, that you might have it more abundantly, that you bear fruit richly, that if you're blind, that your eyes be opened, if you're deaf, your ears be opened. In other words, that the grace of God fill us with an infinite abundance of spiritual good. But not one word is said there about using it as a goal to acquire palaces and kingdoms and earthly treasures, for it is said, my kingdom is not of this world. And until the spiritual student can accept that wholeheartedly and say, I pray not for the kingdoms of this world, I am not praying for the 4 temporal kingdoms, all of which in the end will have to be destroyed anyhow by the Christ. For it is decreed that in the end the 4 temporal kingdoms will be destroyed by that stone which is carved out of the side of a mountain without hands. In other words, the Christ. Spiritual influence. So it is. Spiritual love has no human desire in it. It has lots of human fulfillment. Spiritual life has eternity in it, but without taking thought for what we shall eat or what we shall drink or wherewithal we shall be clothed. The kingdom of heaven is one of palaces and yachts and estates and great peace and harmony, and everyone is a master and there are no servants there. That's a strange kingdom, isn't it, in which we have all of these great wonders but no servants to take care of them. For each one is a master, and each master has to become his own servant. That's the spiritual kingdom. But we are too intent on believing that heaven means being a master with lots of servants. And not necessarily only in the sense of household help. No. Let it be clear to us then that one of the reasons for our discontent, and there must be these seasons of discontent, one of the reasons is that we are not having the four temporal kingdoms fulfilled in us as we had hoped a few years ago might be the case. And that now we are being called upon to surrender our desire for the four temporal kingdoms for the things of this world, which the Master overcame, and which we so ardently pray for most of the time, and that our goal now is purely a spiritual one, not the attaining of place, position, name, or fame. Actually, it should be clear to you who have been with this work now quite a few years, as you notice how I travel, seeking no publicity, seeking no name, no fame, seeking no newspaper notices, seeking no notoriety. You must see that the nature of this work is that of a spiritual underground in which we have no kings, we have no princes, we have no upper 10, and we have no lower 5. We are all one in Christ Jesus. We are all one. There is no greater and no lesser. There are just a few who are a few years ahead of the others on the path, but realizing how quickly some of those others are catching up. No. That comes to us as a shock when we realize that in our spiritual ongoing that there are not to be places of honor, places of greatness, places of fame, places of name, that the last thing in the world we will encourage is the publicity that comes to the usual religious activity. I will tell you very openly now and honestly that on the day before we left Hawaii, one of our students, a man of tremendous wealth, offered us money into the millions without limit. Said to my wife and to me that you can have this money without limit into the millions for your purpose. What do you want to do with it? And he was told plainly, we do not wish to accept it, and we won't accept it. And we didn't accept it. Why? I will tell you why. From the day that I came into this work 28 years ago, I have had no assured income, assured on the human plane. My income has had to be demonstrated day by day, month by month, year by year. When I started on these pilgrimages around the world, I had no money to pay for them. They were demonstrated spiritually. I have never owned as much money as these trips have cost. They have been demonstrated spiritually. And why? Because how can I be in a position to tell you that the Christ realized divine grace will meet your every need if I have some wealthy backer paying my bills? Every dollar that has gone into this work has been demonstrated. Every publisher, everything that has gone into it. We have had here in London all of our writings being published by Fowler, and everything went into that. He was given the titles, he was given the books and manuscripts that already existed, and money to help produce them, and the sales that had been demonstrated for him, not for profit. He didn't pay for that. That was part of the Infinite Ways demonstration of its student body. So every single step along this way has been one of demonstration. And why? Because I have got to be in the position of telling you from experience, and not merely the experience of 20 years ago. It has to be a continuing demonstration that every single day God's manna falls, and sufficient unto that day is the manna thereof. When I can demonstrate that for you, I can prove it and show you how to do it and set you on your way. In the same way, we will be traveling this year 42 weeks out of 52. That is not resting by the wayside demonstrating a beautiful home. Yes, I have the beautiful home. Our goal in life is not a beautiful home, it is service. It is bringing this message to human consciousness if we travel 42 weeks or 52 weeks. This is a service of living in a hotel room or sitting up in an airplane or wherever occasion may be. Why? Because I'm trying to indicate to you not only that the grace of God is my strength on these trips, that the grace of God is my health on these trips, the grace of God is my youth on these trips, the grace of God is my supply on these trips. Why? Not for my sake. No. For the sake of the teaching itself and the example that it sets to the students. Now I realize that it would be an easy thing. Many times we have been offered large sums of money in this work to finance our work. It would be a very simple thing to accept that and then to say to all the students, now for the rest of your days you'll have all these joys and no expenses. Do you think for a moment that I believe that that would be demonstration? No, it would be demonstration only for those who made those contributions. It would be their demonstration, not the demonstration of the students who sat by only to receive. That is why I say to you, there is a surrender in this work. There is a complete dependence on the Spirit of God. You see, in our early stages, we may turn to each other as patients and practitioners or students and teachers for help. That's a legitimate activity of this work. Many of you have experienced it. But it is not the ultimate demonstration. The ultimate demonstration is that ye go and do likewise and be a help to the younger students coming up along the way who have not yet achieved that degree of self-surrender which permits the Spirit of God to flow through them as a healing agency. Never think for a moment that you can retain all of your ego and the healing consciousness too. And never believe for a moment that you can hang on to your love of human comforts and the healing spirit too. Oh no. You remember how Peter had to surrender his final belief in the fact that the Gentiles were filthy before he could go out and bring the Holy Ghost to Cornelius and his friends. You will remember that Christ Jesus had to go through 3 huge temptations. He had to resist them and overcome them. The love of fame, the desire to demonstrate supply, the desire to use personal powers, all three of these he had to overcome before he was in possession of the Spirit of Christ. Now you see, the Infinite Way is saying to you, as he said years ago, there is a spirit in man, there is a Spirit of Christ, and it will raise up your mortal bodies. It will be the bread and the wine and the water unto your experience. It will take you out of those bad years of the locust. There is a spirit, but there is a price to be paid for it, a surrender. You cannot add spirituality to a vessel already full of materiality. You cannot add to yourself the kingdom of heaven if you're merely trying to build 4 temporal kingdoms within yourself. If there is a love of personal power, if there is a love of glory, if there is a love of name or fame, if there is a desire merely to show forth the benefits or the fruitage of this in better human circumstances, there is no power to be filled with the Spirit of God, for a vessel must be empty of self before it can be filled with the grace of God. The Master Christ Jesus was a servant. He washed the feet of his disciples. He touched the lepers. He served in any way and in every way to show that it wasn't he himself who had powers, that it was a grace of God that was operating, and not merely operating in him, but would operate in any who were willing to leave their nets, any who were willing to empty themselves of self. And that has been the history all through the ages. Whenever an individual realizes that it is impossible for anyone to heal anyone of anything, when an individual realizes that it is an impossibility to have enough understanding even to heal a headache, then and then only do they become empty vessels through which the Spirit of God can do its work on earth. In these last 2 weeks we have had experiences like these. In one case, it was a child, very young child, in a hospital, and a telegram came from the grandmother that this child was given up to die that night, and would we help? And then came a letter the next week that it was at home, entirely healed. That was during our Chicago classwork. And during our New York classwork, we were called upon by another grandmother for a child that was covered with warts. And Materia Medica had given up this case and said there was no possibility of bringing out this healing. And since I'm here in London, the letter has come that that child has been relieved of all of its claims. Now I ask you frankly, do you believe that there's a man or a woman on the face of the globe capable of performing those things? You know the answer must be no. No. There is only the possibility of sitting so humbly, so completely aware of one's inability even to know how to pray, that the Spirit of God can function and perform its miracles on earth. Now the secret of this is this. The Spirit of God is ever present and is willing and able to lift us up out of our every infirmity, but it has to have a human consciousness for an instrument. There had to be a Jesus Christ to do all those wonderful instantaneous healings. There had to be disciples to do the degree of healings which they performed. There had to be a Mrs. Eddy to give to this world the healings that she brought to it and the instructions which have amounted to such a great power and force in the world throughout all these years. All of this, God has to come through an individual consciousness. There had to be Jesus, there had to be disciples, there had to be Moses, there had to be Elijah, there had to be mystics, there had to be metaphysicians, there had to be practitioners, There had to be teachers. God operates through the instrumentality of individual human consciousness. When individual human consciousness is purged of itself and of its desires for self-glorification or for self-profit or for whatever it is that the four temporal kingdoms represent. Now, you who have been, and you see, I'm not saying this out in a public lecture. This is being said in this room at Hope House for the benefit of you, almost every one of you of whom have been in this work 4 or 5 years, 6 years probably. I'm saying this to you, that when you go out as a practitioner or as a teacher, or when you serve in that capacity, even though you may not name yourself publicly a practitioner or teacher, but when you serve in that capacity, you're going to offend the very humans that you wish to bless, because you will have to bring to them the same message of surrender. You will not be able to cater to the grosser parts of human nature that all of us in some stage want catered to. You too will have to offend. You too will have to pluck out eyes and cut off hands and say the way is straight and narrow, and you'll either follow it in a straight and narrow way or you will not enter. You will make yourselves unpopular, because this pathway is not the pathway of popularity, and anyone seeking popularity better stay away from it. Stay away from it, because you are called upon to discipline. You are called upon to correct. You are called upon to teach rigid principles which the human mind never liked in the days of Jesus Christ. It never liked them in the days of Moses. That's why they had to have a golden calf even after Moses revealed the nature of God, because human nature doesn't like to surrender its golden calves. And the biggest golden calf it has is self. Self-indulgence. Self. Anything but self-surrender. So you see that this work from this stage on isn't as simple as it's been in the past. In the past, I've been content merely to sit here and tell you these principles, teach you these principles, and then when you needed help, give you whatever help was available through my consciousness. But from here on in, those of you who stick will have to learn that this is a pathway of self-surrender, and for this reason. That word I that we use when we speak of I Joel, I Bill, I Mary, that's a devil. That's the devil that would keep us out of the kingdom of heaven. The I that is God is only in operation when the I that is Joel is dead. You must die daily. There must be a complete surrender of that little I, and that is the path that you will find difficult. Even to the extent, as I have told you, of writing and saying, well, isn't it a good desire to want to heal my friends? No, it isn't a good desire to want to heal your friends. It isn't a good desire to have a desire. The only good desire is no desire. That's the only good desire, is no desire. No desire. When you come to the healing work, you'll find the value of that. Because you're going to learn sooner or later that all the prayers that man ever voiced are about as valueless as yesterday's newspaper. There never was a prayer uttered by man that reached the throne of God. Man cannot pray with signs following. Man has to be a hollow instrument through which the Spirit prays. And when the Spirit prays in and through man, spiritual fruitage takes place in this world. There are men and women praying in 1 million churches on the face of the earth for peace, and there is no peace. They're praying for health, and there is no health, and there will be none until men and women stop praying and learn to be hollow instruments in which and through which the Spirit of God can make intercession. I know not how to pray, how to go out, or how to come in. The Spirit of God in me makes intercession with my spirit. It's the Spirit of God that prays. It's the Spirit of God that performs these great healing works on earth throughout every generation, where there have been people able to be still and silent and say, I will listen for thy voice. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. And in that emptiness inside, the Spirit of God flows. And when it appears, spiritual fruitage appears. Certainly in its early stages it may be painful when it's breaking up the humanness in us, when it's breaking up the physical discords in us, when it's destroying in us the wrong moral sense that we carry around at times. Certainly there will be disturbances in our system, but we must accept those with gratitude, for it indicates that no longer are these traits, qualities, and conditions lying dormant within us. Now they're being roused up, rooted up, and we will be purified if we are faithful. In my work in the States, we have classwork just as we have over here, but that classwork is really a stepping stone. Out of these classes, well, first of all, out of the lecture audiences of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, come the classes of just the 50s and 75s and 100s. And out of those classes come the dozens or half dozens who have great yearnings toward the spiritual life and who seek further guidance. And it is the work that is carried on with them that opens their consciousness ultimately to the activity of the Spirit, so that they too can begin to live that same life, not living their life, but having Christ live their life for them. The degree of that attainment lies within each individual to decide and to follow. And I hope while we're here that some of you will want to experience that greater life. And so now let us stop this and have a meditation. And in this meditation, I'm going to ask you to take as your introductory word the word is, and to let it abide in you for a few moments and then disappear as you merely become receptive to the spiritual experience. Now, the reason for the word is this: we are to have no desires, therefore we are not to pray to God for anything. And the only way that we can refrain from praying is to acknowledge that whatever it is that we would pray for already is. In other words, the kingdom of God already is within me, or The Lord is my shepherd. I have nothing to pray for. I have nothing to fear, nothing to want. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me beside the still waters. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. So I'm completely surrounded with is. The Lord is. The Lord is. I already am. The grace that I'm seeking is already established within me. And so I want to bring to you the consciousness, the state of feeling that harmony already is. That nothing can come to you now from God. For God has planted in the midst of you His Son. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly. And so now this I being established in you, you have nothing to pray for. Your prayer only is the word is. The Lord is my shepherd. Harmony already is. Perfection is. Infinity is. The kingdom of God is within me. And so in that is, you have no more desires. You have nothing more to attain. You have only to abide in the word, thank you, Father, is. Everything is. Let's do that.